It's Dynasty off-season time, so of course it's time to talk some strategy. But we're going to do a little bit different this time. We're going to approach some traditional Dynasty trade tropes and ask whether they're real or whether we can scoop up some value by flipping the script and doing the reverse. And of course, whenever you're talking Dynasty trades, you've got to get the master himself on to have a conversation with you. I'm joined by the fantastic Russ Fisher. You probably know him as Dynasty Outhouse. Russ, how are you doing this fine afternoon?
I am fantastic. Thank you for asking, and thank you for having me on.
That is always a pleasure. I always try to throw something slightly different at you whenever you take the time to come on. So yeah, I'm trying to flip the script here. So what I've got is, I guess, 4 or 5 kind of traditional moves that you're supposed to do if you're in Dynasty, that, you know, as you head into the off season, the things you should be trying to achieve with your Dynasty roster. And I'm basically going to pose to you, do you agree with this? Or could we potentially scoop up some value by flipping the script and doing the opposite and perhaps playing people at their own game? So we're going to start at the top. And I guess this is the fairly, the basic one, the obvious one. We feel like every single year we head into the off season, the Dynasty world becomes age obsessed. Nobody wants to roster any running back over what used to be 28. Now it's probably about 26. Any wide receiver over 30, they're all gone. Do you think that's valid? Or do you think that now the price on these players has dropped so significantly that actually you can gain some real value in the offseason, perhaps targeting those sort of players, whether to keep them to score points in point scoring season, or whether you could potentially flip them for a profit as we get close to the NFL season?
You said a lot of very key things here. Is the fact that this is one of the oldest, one of the biggest tropes in Dynasty, especially these days when it's very age obsessed, because you want to build that dynasty. It's kind of like, you remember maybe 5-ish years ago where the idea of trading down in drafts became a sensation. So it's like, oh, I got the 101, sweet, now I could trade back. No one wanted early picks because you always wanted the most top 100, top 25, whatever it was. So it started to become such a phenomenon that people just did it just for the sake of doing it, where you weren't necessarily getting the value for the 101 anymore, but cool, you got 3 picks in the top 100. Okay, great. But you just lost out on the 101 and didn't really get that. That's where we are with this one, where it's almost like you said before, wide receivers, we used to get scared at 30. Thanks, Calvin Johnson, for just retiring for no reason. And then all of a sudden it's, well, if they lose their value at 30, we need to get out at 28 because it's better to be a year early than a year late, and you don't want to hold on to them for the 29-year-old season. Then it was, well, if they start to lose value at 28, we should get rid of them at 27. and like you said before, all of a sudden there's just no such thing as the right age anymore. So I'm with you on this one, where I think it's gotten to the point that people are so eager to get rid of these players that they consider old that you get them for next to nothing. And the thing is, if you buy them now in February when September rolls along and we hit point scoring season, you might not get a big return on it, but someone you can get for a second, you might get to give away for 2 seconds later on. So whether you want to make the push into competing, or if you are just holding on for value's sake and you have patience, if you have patience, holding on to these scoring players is a brilliant move.
Yeah, I think it's kind of gone beyond the joke a little bit, some of this kind of value, decline as such. I think you need to be, my one caveat is you need to be a little bit careful because you need to know your league. And you need to understand, what you don't want to do is go out and buy Tyreek Hill and Mike Evans and, Cooper Kupp. And then nobody wants to buy them off you for more than you've paid. And you just end up with these 3 aging receivers that you're perhaps not in a position to compete. You're just sat there and you've sort of burnt your assets and can't get anything returned. But I think you can almost guarantee these guys that will be first or second round picks when we hit redraft season.
Yep.
That are, you can go out and buy for a second round pick. I mean, I'm not a huge Deebo Samuel guy, but the fact that he's currently being valued in the wide receiver 50s is absolutely insane to me. Wherever he ends up playing next year, like it's wild. We see this on wide receivers particularly. I think we see it with running backs as soon as they hit that second contract. And I'm a guy that preachers always be selling running backs, but it does get to a point where, do you know what? Actually, outside of probably 5 or 6 running backs, it feels like so flat in the valuation in trades of a huge amount of running backs. Do I really want to try and chase potential that's got youth, or of, I don't know, someone like let's say Tyron Tracy or something like that? That he could be great, but I can probably get a similar value for Derrick Henry, and I know Derrick Henry's going to be great next year.
Yeah.
And it's like, do I want one great season of Derrick Henry or the potential of Tyron Tracy? And worst case scenario, gets to week 3, week 4. I'm not having a great start to the season. Well, I know that Derrick Henry is going to be producing fantasy points and I can sell him for a profit. So, I think you need to be a little bit careful with this one, not go all in, not trade every single asset you've got to go and build the over 30s all-stars. But I think if you can selectively acquire a couple at a reduced price because somebody else is looking to get age off their roster, I think you could definitely flip it and sell for a profit as we head towards that sort of redraft / start of the season.
Yeah, the safe move of this is playing redraft, getting these older scoring players because they're older scoring players and you want to compete. Doing that as a rebuilding team, while there is absolutely value to it, honestly, that's a game even I don't play because, well, first of all, I don't have patience. So like if I acquired someone in February for the sake of selling them once points started scoring, it's going to be March and I'll be like, I need to get this guy off my roster. I can't sit here staring at him any longer. And then I'll probably sell him for, at best, what I got for him, which at least I didn't lose, which there's always a chance I will, just because I like clicking buttons too much that I don't always make the smartest decisions. But this is definitely, again, you're right. We have gotten so far that you can find the right value, but also the real important thing is, making the joke that at first it was 30, then 28, then 27. 27 is the prime age for when wide receivers go into their best athletic abilities. Like that's when their bodies are in their prime. If someone thinks that's old, you go get that player and use them for another 3 years. But when we're talking about the Cooper Kupps and the 31 and Keenan Allens and Devontae Adams, like the 31 to 33-year-olds, that's when really only if you want them for the points they're going to score. When it gets to that's the dangerous game.
Yeah, I think it needs to really be price dependent on those guys. Like if you can get them for an absolute bargain, then that's fine. If you're still having to pay, sticker price as such, I think that's where you start to balk at it. I think the interesting guys are when you say about guys in that 27 range that are still in the peak of their powers, but we're starting to see the decline in value. Someone like AJ Brown, this guy, example. He's had stretches the last 2 years where he's been the wide receiver 1 in fantasy. He's starting to fall down those dynasty ranks. This is a guy that was a top 5 dynasty wide receiver. He's now sort of in that fringe top 12. I wouldn't be surprised if some people had him outside the top 12. If you can start to get him at a discount because people are worried about the age, like he's still going to have 3, if not 4, really solid fantasy years. So I think he's certainly a player that ticks that box of someone you can look to buy now because people are looking to get off season players. Next thing we're going to move on to, though, is if you're in a rebuild, you sell everyone on your roster who's over 24, 25, 26, whatever age you want, you buy young players and picks. Do you adhere to this as the only way to rebuild, or do you think you can flip that?
No, honestly, I think this is a foolish way to rebuild. You need something to build around. You're not going to hit on every draft pick you make. So why not have some players on your team that are good? And this isn't saying don't pay attention to age, but why not have a 25-year-old wide receiver to build around who will still be good in 2 years, assuming your rebuild takes that long? Like, why not have any age quarterback under the age of 35 even? Like, Dak Prescott is 31, and I would still keep him on a rebuilding team because I don't think he's retiring anytime soon. And that's a solid quarterback to build around. So I really don't think you need to sell your veterans just to buy young players and picks, because I think there's a lot to be said for having seen it done in the NFL consistently enough over a couple of years. Like, I mean, rebuilding or not, T. Higgins is on almost every single one of my teams. And it just so happens to help that he's a free agent this year. So there's going to be that little boost in value that if he does, there's rumors of him getting tagged again, which I'm not thrilled about. But like, if he does go to a new team, which, don't get me wrong, being on the Bengals offense is a great thing, but just like, I want closure to this situation. Like, I want him to go and get his extended contract, his long-term contract, so I can go buy a new jersey if I need to buy a new jersey, I'd like rework my decorating going on down here. But there's nothing like that's like the prime example of someone like all of the wide receivers I love, T. Higgins, Devonta Smith, Jalen Waddle, all of these 26, 25-year-old wide receivers, like, you build around those. All of the 27-year-old quarterbacks, you build around those. You don't get rid of them just because there's 22-year-olds in the league, because it's too much risk. You need to, sooner or later, you need to stop rebuilding, and you stop that by being able to compete. And if you have 6 draft picks a season, and even if you hit on 2 or 3 of them, which would be amazing, you still start 10 players. How many years is that going to take? Assuming you do that well every single year. So this is something that gets taken at its word. Is this something you do? Yes. Is it something you do for the sake of doing? No. Is this something you do every time? No. I'm sorry, that was a lot at once.
No, I loved it. I think I'm probably going to offend some people here. I think this approach, this advice, to me is the laziest, most useless advice in all of Dynasty, because if you're selling veterans and buying young players and picks, you're basically committing to like a 3-4 year rebuild. What's the point? It's just
you're never going to get to the finish line.
Exactly. And I a couple of off seasons ago said that I truly believe that no rebuild should take more than 12 months. And what I mean by that is not going from rebuild to true contender in 12 months, but you shouldn't be on that rebuild cycle for longer than 12 months. I think that after a 12-month period, you should be in a position where you are looking to acquire point scoring players and compete. Yes, you might not win the title in your first year, but if you're setting up for a multi-year rebuild, I think you're doing it wrong. And I think that, selling veterans, buying young players and picks, great. That's what you're supposed to do. You'll acquire some asset, picks always accumulate in value, great. But actually, what I think you need to do is raise your risk profile and say, look, I am going to, rather than just buying young players and picks, I'm going to take some shots on some people that I think are significantly undervalued that have the chance to blow up. And it's like, if it doesn't work out, who cares? Worst case scenario, I'm still not a very good team. That would have been what would have happened if you'd have just sold and bought young players and picks. But I think if you can identify some underpriced guys that you think could blow up, if you can identify someone like, let's say, for example, someone like Tank Bigsby, who at the moment is kind of a 1B in a bad offense, but has the chance, if Travis Etienne goes, Tank Bigsby suddenly becomes the lead back. The Jags invest in the offensive line. Liam Cohen reinvigorates the entire offense. Suddenly Tank Bigsby could be a top 12 back because he's a lead back in an offense. Those are the kind of players that I think you need to be looking to acquire. Not because he's young, but because he's in a role that could see a spike in value. Someone like Jalen Warren is in a similar situation. I think you need to sort of raise your risk profile and be willing to take those shots, because if they don't work out, you've lost nothing. And it just helps accelerate that rebuild, because if you're sitting there going, yeah, I'm just checking out of this for 2-3 years, it kind of ruins dynasty leagues to me as well. If you've got 2 or 3 owners that are just completely checked out because they're only looking for picks and young players, it's just a bit rubbish and it's not fun. And the best dynasty leagues are ones where everybody's trying to get better and compete, and they're active, quite frankly, rather than just sitting there going, I'm going to wait till 2028 because I've got 13 great picks that might eventually come in.
Yeah, and just to add on to what you're saying, even if you are, because don't get me wrong, I've done a 3-year rebuild where I went from multiple years of earning the 101 to winning the championship the next season. Thank you, Saquon Barkley. And it is so much fun. It really, really is. I did it once. I'll never do it again because 3 years is ridiculous. But it was fun to like I joked around before about hitting on just through the draft and stuff like that, and then taking that last season and then being like, all right, these are the right players for me to go and acquire to compete. But the truth is, everything you said is absolutely right. In the fact that if you're rebuilding, and even if you are buckling in for a 2-year rebuild, that doesn't mean you sit and wait. You need to be churning bottom of your roster, and trying to gain value wherever you can. Play the wire so you can sell players for a third, send 2/3 for a second. Go and get the Jalen Warrens, who's probably going to end up getting tagged and might be the 1A on his team because Najee Harris is a free agent. Like there's plenty of these players that are not like above roster cloggers, but players that don't have that shot yet that might be able to. All of the your roster should be filled with backup running backs. Because the second a player gets hurt, someone's going to need to refill that. So you trade, all of a sudden, some guy you drafted in the 3rd or 4th round of your rookie drafts, you're selling for a second. So you're making your rebuild roster a little stronger, because all of a sudden you went from this player that was worth nothing to a player that has value but nothing to you, to something that has value to your team, trading it from that player to a pick or for a young wide receiver or something like that. So even if you are rebuilding and you are buckled in for a long rebuild, that doesn't mean you sit and do nothing. That's absolutely wrong, because that'll A, make it take longer, B, it's boring. Why would you want to not pay attention to your league? Like you said, that kills leagues. You shouldn't. I made it. It's funny, on the Trade Addicts, we did a New Year's resolution episode, and that was my New Year's resolution, was to pay more attention to my rebuilding teams, because I had one team that I realized, I'm like, I locked up the 101 early, and I was just like, okay. And then I forgot to look back. That's also part of the problem of being in too many leagues. I cut down this year. And I looked back, I'm like, oh crap, I had 3 running backs I could have sold at some point, but I just kept going, nope, got the 101, don't worry about it. Got the 101, don't worry about it. Like, I could have made my team better, and I didn't. So my New Year's resolution was to pay more attention to my rebuilding teams, because it'll get me out of the rebuild faster.
Yeah. And I think there's, we've all done it. We've all been there. We've all been in lots of leagues and forgotten about players, or left. The worst thing, I think, is leaving someone on your taxi that is like one of those running backs that suddenly comes into a lead back role that's probably only going to be fantasy relevant for 3 weeks. And this is like your one chance to sell, and you've not been active and you've forgotten that he's there. And then you go to look at your roster in January or February, you're like, damn, I missed the boat there. I could have, maybe put him in a 3rd to get a 2nd or something, and now he's worthless.
I had Jordan Mason on one of my teams that I didn't pay attention to. Like, what I could have gotten a 1st for him. It's like Jordan Mason and the 2nd for a 1st would have happened so easily to the CMC manager, I'm sure. And I was just like, nope, I screwed that up. That's on me.
It's and we'll stick on that trend of selling running backs. So I guess the other trope is, I said it. I was a card carrying member previously. Always be selling running backs, build around quarterbacks, wide receivers, those longer term positions. This is now the world we live in. Running backs are significantly less valued in Dynasty than they used to be. No longer are the days of 1 QB ADP being 6, 7, 8 running backs. It's now filled with wide receivers. Do you still buy into that, or do you think we're potentially pushed the boat too far?
No, I'm still pretty much selling running backs. There's of course the few exceptions, and it's like the top 5 or 6. The names at this point. Like they're those, like I have Jahmyr Gibbs on a couple of teams of, even if they're not. I had Jahmyr Gibbs on rebuilding teams that were close to competing because I know he was going to be he'll still be ready to compete when I'm ready to compete, like nice and young. So I wouldn't sell Gibbs, Hall, Bijan just because they're a running back on my team. But I mean, I don't like rolling into offseason with the Mixons of the world if I'm not going to still be competing. Like that's really what it is. It's those, if you can get any value for a guy that is only worth one season and you don't need that season, then go for it. Because the truth is, I can sell Joe Mixon for a second right now. Season comes around, I did a good job. I was a good GM in this non-point scoring season. I think I'm ready to compete. Like I didn't think I was. But it'll cost me a second and a third to go get Joe Mixon now that the season's, rolled around. It's not going to cost that much of a difference. So like those are the kinds of guys I don't mind moving too much, because even if something magically happens and you want them back, the price isn't going to change too much. Derrick Henry might be like one of the one guys where that's not the case, where he'll be worth a second at best in the non-point scoring season, but the second the season starts, it's like a first and a second or no deal, just because it's Derrick Henry. That's what he does. But there's most of those, especially older running backs, all the 2017ers, and I guess Saquon's the only 2018er left really at this point, but he's one of those players that he's long-term to me. I don't care that he's 26, 27. Like he and Christian McCaffrey, to me, they'll be great until they decide not to be anymore. I'm a little worried about McCaffrey's injuries and such, but I still I haven't traded him away on a single one of my teams, even though we trade running backs.
Yeah, I think this is probably the one trope that I struggle to get fully on board with. I think I'm fascinated to see what's going to happen with running back value in Dynasty after the running back renaissance, shall we say, last year, where we obviously saw running backs win fantasy leagues and some of the bigger wide receivers slightly disappoint. But I'm not at a point where I'm looking to have my cornerstones as running backs. I still view running backs as the final piece of the puzzle for my dynasty teams. I just think as we touched on earlier, those veteran running backs can be so cheap and so easy to just drop in. I'd much rather still build around those kind of quarterbacks, wide receivers, because they just feel like safer, longer term assets. So, yeah, I think I'm always going to be always be selling running backs. I'm always going to carry that card, and I'm not sure I can fully get on board with flipping this trope as such.
Yeah, no, like this is because even if I do enjoy having the young stud running backs on a team, I'm not going to build around that. It's more of just a cherry on top. It's the gravy on the potatoes. It's just something extra to have, but it's not something I would ever build around, because that puts a real clock on your rebuild. And I think that's really what the problem is with me. A 24-year-old wide receiver is going to hold their value for 3 or 4 years before it becomes his just age. That's all we could talk about, is before their age becomes a problem. Of course, players get better, players get worse, players just disappear. But that's very individual, and we can't talk about the individual because it's just too impossible. So we have to talk on the bigger scale. And on a bigger scale, running backs stay relevant for 2 years. and that's really it. And I don't mean in the NFL, I don't mean scoring points. I mean pure fantasy value wise. And if you're rebuilding, that's really what matters. And if you pick the wrong running back to put your horse on, that kills your rebuild if you built around them. Because if you have a bunch of young wide receivers and a running back that just hit their prime and they're not good anymore, it's good that you have a bunch of young wide receivers still, but you just sort of wasted that window of what you could have gotten redraft trade value for these running backs, which is huge once the season rolls around. You know, people still do believe that running backs win fantasy leagues. And after that, like you said, after the year we just had, it's hard to say that they're wrong with some of the running back performances we had and all of the wide receiver performances that we had. But it's just, it's so safer and so much more logical to build around the quarterbacks and receivers. And then, not to say you have to go get Joe Mixon or Alvin Kamara when you're ready to compete. You can go and buy Breece Hall, go buy a 22-year-old running back. That's fine, but still, that should always be the last piece to me.
And I think that the other point is the problem with running back value is so injury dependent. You know, you look at the impact on dynasty value for someone like Jonathan Brooks compared to Tank Dell. Now, I appreciate that Tank Dell had a really good rookie year, whereas Jonathan Brooks didn't have that. But Jonathan Brooks is absolutely plummeted in dynasty value because he's not going to play in the 2025 season. Tank Dell is still holding his value, and he's not going to play in the 2025 season. He's older than Jonathan Brooks, but it just shows that those running backs are literally one injury away from their dynasty value just evaporating. Whereas the wide receivers have that little bit more where they can come back from injuries. You know, we see it time and time again where guys have these horrendous injuries. They're slow the first year back, but at wide receiver, they've still got time to produce. Whereas at running back, it's sadly not the case.
Yep.
Before we move on to our next questions, though, if you are joining us and you've not hit the subscribe button, go ahead and do that now. The next two questions are actually from our members. If you want to be a member, come and join the sanctuary. You can hit the join button down below. So, Russ, questions from our members. These are slightly interesting thoughts, I guess, that they want to ask around. This isn't something I've done or particularly seen done, but apparently it's something that's quite rife in terms of you're selling future picks for current draft picks to try and accelerate that window. So, you know, if you're heading into 2025 draft, you're selling your 2027 first for a 2025 first. I guess you're probably getting a lesser pick, but the idea is that you're turning a kind of a non-functional asset into a liquid asset. Is that something that you would do, or do you think you could potentially flip that and look to sell current assets for those future assets down the road?
It is very draft class dependent. You know, when you hit a class like 2020 and 2023, you load in. You're like, all right, I'm going to like everyone in this class. Sure, let me sell my 26 and 27s to get into 25. I don't think this is the kind of class to do that in. There are a lot of running backs. So if you are one or two pieces from your rebuild being done, yeah, maybe you go and trade you have your 25 first, you trade your 26 first and a second for another mid to late first. You scoop up two running backs and maybe you're ready to go. It's not like this isn't something you can do as a rolling as like a rolling concept, because first of all, you'll run out of future picks to sell. You know, at least in my leagues, they're all on MFL and they're 2 years trades out. Like we just got our 27 picks. So there's a couple of leagues where, you know, people know who I am and what I like to do. So the second the MFL rolls over and the new year picks come out, I start getting offers for my new first. And yeah, sure, some leagues it's fine to do that, especially if you're in competition constantly. Like that's the thing. If you want to sell it for a player, that's one thing, but selling your future draft picks for current is bad process, because usually you have to give up more future to get current. Like you need to give a first and a second to get a first. Yeah, that was worded very poorly. You need to give a 26 first and second to get a 25 first.
I got what you meant, Russ. It was fine.
Good, I'm glad. So like that, it's sort of only good process if you are a draft person, you like this draft and you know these players that you want to get. I don't think it's something you can just do as constant process, because sooner or later you run out of future picks and it might just be a bad class and not worth having multiple firsts in it, you know? So this is very, very draft dependent and very, very kind of.
It feels to me like selling future picks for current picks is the kind of slightly arrogant kind of evaluation style manager that's saying, I know this pick is this player is a superstar, so I'm going to sell my future picks to go and get them because this draft class is good or whatever. And I just think that, to me, that's the way you'll get yourself in trouble, because we know this is a crapshoot. You know, the best prospects ever can bust. And I think that if you do that approach and make those too many of those almost certain swings, you're just going to come unstuck very, very quickly. I love flipping this. One of my favorite moves is to look to sell a current draft pick for future picks. We've just done a mock draft with Mags where I said, if I can sell my 109, 110 or later in this year's draft class, because I think there's kind of a top 8 for a 2026 first or a 27 first plus something, I'm doing that 100 times out of 100, because I think even if it's a really good team, I'll take the chance that they get some injuries or drop and it's a higher pick, but also I prefer those draft classes. So if I can then sell a 25 pick for a 26 pick plus, like you said, a 25 first for a 26 first and a second, I love that move. And I think that that's when you can start to think dynasty rather than redraft. And I think that's what separates the consistent competitive teams, because you're never one player away. You're building your roster correctly, you're building your roster value correctly. You can say, actually, yeah, I'm going to take the longer view, knowing that you can get that asset. One of my favorite things as well is to not necessarily have that second round pick in the future years. Can you send, the 106 for a 26 first and the 206 or something like that? So you're just moving back, but acquiring a serious future asset. I think that's a really nice move, because you're still then taking the lottery pick. You're still getting that dart throw at a player in this year's draft class.
Yep.
And you're not massively taking any sort of risk, because you're just pushing those assets down the road as such.
Yeah, exactly like you said, is knowing the draft classes and shooting your shot at one. Like pushing to 27 right now, while 27 is far away, but getting in the Arch Manning lottery is and the Jeremiah, if Jeremiah Smith decides to come out as soon as possible, like,
and Ryan Williams,
like there's some
it's
serious
pretty good
talent. So if you have that kind of patience, doing the opposite of this is the right way to move. Of course, you need to hope those picks are the 101, 102 or 3-ish. But like that's really why pushing forward is dangerous, because you don't know a lot about future years. We don't know enough about this year yet to really, like, this is something maybe I do when I'm on the clock, and there's, like you said, I'm on the clock and there's this player I believe in. Okay, I'll sell my future picks for current pick. Like, again, like, it's so easy. I love having this behind me, because I was a huge T. Higgins fan of him coming in, and he was drafted in the early second of almost every single draft. And I sold my future picks to get into the beginning of the second whenever I wasn't, if I didn't have an early second, so like being on the board or on the clock at the time is a very different story than just doing it for the sake of doing it. This is, I think, a dangerous move to do if you're doing it just for the sake of doing it.
Yeah, no, it makes complete sense. And then we're going to get you out of here on this final question, Russ. Always win 100% of the trades you make.
It's physically.
What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, it's just physically impossible, right? First of all, I run a bunch of leagues called the Trade Addicts leagues, and they're all purposefully pretty cheap. And whenever I'm filling a spot, I always say to them, these leagues are about fun. They're about doing things you might not normally do. That's why their buy-in is pretty cheap. Plus, we always donate to charity. Everyone should donate to charity with their leagues. But if your answer to these leagues are fun is, well, winning is fun, then this league isn't really for you. Because while of course it's competitive because there is money on the line, everyone wants to win money and everything like that. It's not supposed to be a cutthroat league. And that's the way I play. I play for the fun of it more than anything else. And if consigning to losing, let's make up some numbers right here. If I have to lose 10% on a trade to get a deal done for A, me to get a player I really like, or B, just to make good with a trade partner that I think will help me in the future, I'll lose 10% on a trade right now. I mean, of course you always want to win. And the real sticking point on this is you don't need to win a lot. If you win 2% on every single trade you make, after 50 trades, you're at 100%. Of hopefully you do get a couple more spike wins than 2% along the way. But you don't have to win 100% of the trades you make. You make the trades you want because you want to. If you're competing and your running back gets hurt and you need to overpay to go get Saquon Barkley, you overpay to go get Saquon Barkley. If you're rebuilding and you know that you need this running back off your roster because you're burning it alive and the draft is coming up and you like the young wide receivers in this draft, settle for a second, a third when you really wanted 2 seconds. I don't think you need to come out on top of every single trade, because I think sooner or later that makes people not want to trade with you. Because if you're so bullish on getting every ounce you can get out of someone, it just comes off as being, I don't know, like a bully.
And I think that, to me, that's the perfect point. Is I did a video probably 2 or 3 years ago now where I talked about the ideal trade is the Michael Scott win-win-win, where you as far as you're concerned, you win, you improve your roster, you get to do whatever you want to do. So does your trade partner. But everybody else in the league is also happy because it's a balanced trade. And they look at you and say, that guy's making good trades. I want to trade with him. And I think that that's something that is so often overlooked, is that a league is such a little microeconomy where you've got normally 12 people. If you alienate 1 or 2 owners that don't then want to trade with you because you did them over with a trade, or you did somebody else over with a trade, and they think that it's creating unfair, that puts you at such a disadvantage, because you're knocking out 8% of the league every time you upset someone. And I just think that you need to, yes, obviously you want to try and achieve something with every trade. You want to get better. You want to accumulate more roster value, whatever. But I think if you're only going out to try and rip people off every single time you're making a trade, your league isn't going to last, and you're going to get yourself a reputation very, very quickly. And I think that, sometimes the best thing is to actually, as you said, find a middle ground that works for you, for the other owner, and makes the rest of the league happy, because those are the best harmonious leagues. And who wants a dynasty league that falls apart in 18 months, 2 years, because the trades are so one-sided and it's outrageous and the owners got annoyed and left and it just falls apart? The beauty of being dynasty league is that you can be 10, 11, 12 beyond years with the same group of people and having a great time, and that's what makes this game so awesome. So yeah, I'm always in favor of that win-win-win trade.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to remember that you're all salesmen in the end, salespeople. Just like, that's why I kind of giggled at the Michael Scott reference, because, well, first of all, Michael Scott, but also because like that really is part of the game, is that people will not trade with you just because. It's funny. It's why I'm terrified of the QBX, like John Hogue's QBX, where you compile all of these quarterbacks, because sooner or later people are going to need quarterbacks. First of all, it's predicated on streaming, and I'm terrible at picking the right players to start. But also because, and it's not that I think that people don't like me or anything, it's just that people get annoyed when you pull that sometimes, when you just start scooping up everything. So like, oh, you expect me to overpay, so I'm not even going to send you an offer. And it's just like, no, you don't have to overpay. I promise. Like, so it really, like, you need to come off as someone willing to work with someone. I just did a trade today, actually. We've been going back and forth for about 3 days now. And we both almost at the same time typed, oh, fine. Like, because we got to the point where like, we knew that the value, that we weren't completely in sync on value, but we knew we were close enough. So we both felt like we gave up a little too much. So it's like,
perfect.
Right? So like, did we both lose or did we both win? Neither of us know how, like I'm pretty sure this means it's a perfect trade, right? Because we both feel like we lost a little bit.
This is where having members that have access to my exact trade values is a blessing and a curse, because it's amazing sometimes where I just get offers from members and it's like, this is in your trade calculator as a yes. And I look at it, I'm like, yep, that's a great deal, and just hit accept immediately. It's perfect. But then there are also times where you get members that are like, right, this is equal in your trade calculator, so I want a third on top. And it's like, do I give in and give up value, or do I try and kind of stand my ground? And it's never fun. But yeah, it's as I said, blessing and a curse. But that wraps us up, Russ. Thank you ever so much for jumping on. Always an absolute pleasure, and always appreciate you giving up your time. Remind everyone that is watching, where can they of course find you and listen to your dulcet tones?
Fantasy Cares is everything and everywhere all at once. Good movie. That's really what everything's about. fantasycares.org. On Monday nights we have a trivia show hosted by the Johnny Wright. On Tuesday is the Rookie Hootenanny from the Dynasty Dummies. On Wednesday we have our Wednesday night hangouts, where it's just a bunch of us Fantasy Cares people literally just hanging out and having a good time. Maybe we talk football. Yes, last week we literally talked about food for an hour and 10 minutes straight. Like, that's really all we talked about. It was fantastic. I loved it. And, you know, everything that Fantasy Cares will have going on. We don't have anything at the moment, but keep your eyes open. There's going to be some stuff happening with the Masters and March Madness coming around. There's going to be plenty coming around.
Very exciting times. Go and check out the work. The stuff they're doing is absolutely incredible, and it just shows how amazing this community can be when everyone clubs together and works together. So yeah, go and check out the stuff. We'll be back very soon. We'll get back to some rookie talk. We've got some profiles, we've got some mock drafts, and everything coming very, very soon.